A history student lies in the rubble of a city the Third Reich once erased from the map. She is 25 years old. She has a bolt-action rifle, a scope clouded with dust, and a patience that borders on the inhuman. The morning light over Crimea catches the edge of her position, but she does not move. She has not moved in hours. By the time the Soviet military pulls her from the front, wounded 4 times, her face torn open by shrapnel, 309 enemy soldiers will have died looking down her barrel. 36 of them were trained snipers sent specifically to kill her. Every single one of them failed. This is a woman who enrolled at university to study the past, who dreamed of quiet lecture halls and dusty archives, and who instead became the deadliest female sniper in recorded military history. The Nazis knew her by a name whispered with dread across the Eastern Front, a name that turned hardened soldiers cautious and made officers think twice before raising binoculars. Lady Death, and the Eastern Front, where she earned that name, was the most savage theater of the Second World War. The Soviet Union was hemorrhaging territory at catastrophic speed. Odessa, the jewel of the Black Sea, was surrounded. Sevastopol would be next. In this industrial meat grinder, one woman with a rifle became so effective that German command began broadcasting personal threats over loudspeakers, offering her chocolate and a commission if she switched sides, and promising unspeakable violence if she refused. This is the story of how one rifle and the woman behind it terrorized an entire army. By the end of this video, you will understand why the Nazis feared a single Soviet sniper more than entire battalions, and why the war she survived may have destroyed her anyway. The 3-day sniper duel that became legend. What happened on that final morning? And why did the Soviet Union pull its deadliest shooter off the front lines and send her halfway around the world to meet Eleanor Roosevelt? But before Lady Death became a legend, she was just a girl in Ukraine who could not stand being told what she could not do. Let me set the stage. If stories like this remind you why history is stranger and more gripping than any fiction, hit that like button and subscribe. I bring you the untold stories of history's most extraordinary battles every week. Now, let me take you back to 1916, to a small city south of Kiev. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was born on July 12, 1916, in Belaya Tserkov, Ukraine, a town of whitewashed churches sitting about 50 miles south of Kiev. It was a quiet place, provincial and unhurried, the kind of town where the biggest excitement was the seasonal market and the loudest arguments were over whose garden produced the best tomatoes. Pavlichenko did not fit the mold. She described herself as tomboyish from childhood, competitive and physical, the kind of girl who challenged the neighborhood boys to races and wrestling matches and refused to concede when she lost. There was a stubbornness in her that went beyond ordinary adolescent defiance. It was structural, bone deep, the kind of quality that either gets a person into serious trouble or carries them through it. She enrolled at Kiev University to study history, drawn to the discipline of the past, to the idea that understanding what had already happened could illuminate what was coming next. Her ambition was modest and scholarly. She wanted to be a teacher, perhaps a researcher, someone who spent her life among books and primary sources and the slow accumulation of knowledge. The irony would become almost unbearable. She wanted to study the past. Instead, the future would force her to make it. But that future was not yet written. In the summer of 1941, it arrived with the force of 3 million soldiers crossing a border. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The largest military invasion in human history crashes into the Soviet Union along a front stretching from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Over 3 million German and Axis soldiers pour across the border in coordinated thrusts designed to shatter the Red Army before it can mobilize. The plan is audacious and, in those first weeks, devastatingly effective. The Soviet military, hollowed out by Stalin's paranoid purges of its most experienced officers in the late 1930s, reels under the impact. Entire armies are encircled and annihilated. Cities that had stood for centuries fall in days. By autumn, the Wehrmacht is closing on Moscow, Leningrad is under siege, and the southern front Ukraine is a catastrophe unfolding in real time. Odessa, the great Black Sea port, is surrounded by Romanian and German forces pressing from the north and east. The Soviets are desperate. Not desperate in the abstract, diplomatic sense of the word. Desperate in the way that means every person who can carry a weapon is needed at the front, regardless of age, background, or gender. The losses are so staggering, the territory lost so vast, that the Soviet Union begins doing something no other major power in the Second World War would do on the same scale. It sends women into direct combat. Approximately 2,000 women served as snipers on the Eastern Front over the course of the war. The number itself sounds significant until you learn what happened to them. Only about 500 survived. That is a 75% casualty rate. 3 out of every 4 women who picked up a sniper rifle for the Red Army did not come home. The women who volunteered were often met with skepticism by male soldiers, shunted to secondary roles, or treated as curiosities rather than combatants, at least until the bullets started flying and the kill count started climbing. This was the world Lyudmila Pavlichenko was about to enter. Not a world of glory or recognition. A world of industrialized killing, where the odds said she would not survive. So when Pavlichenko walked into that recruitment office in the summer of 1941, she was not walking into glory. She was walking into a meat grinder that would kill 3 out of every 4 women who did what she was about to do. The question was whether she would even be allowed to try. The answer, at first, was no. Pavlichenko volunteered for the Red Army at 25 years old. The recruiters looked at her, a university student, bookish, female, and did what they did with most women who showed up wanting to serve. They tried to assign her as a field nurse. It was the default, the expected path. Women bandaged wounds. Women carried stretchers. Women did not lie in the dirt for 16 hours waiting for a single shot. Pavlichenko refused, not politely, not with diplomatic hedging. She demanded infantry. This was not a woman making a symbolic gesture. This was a woman who had trained as a competitive marksman before the war, who had the scores and the discipline to back up her insistence, and who had the particular brand of stubbornness that treats the word no as the opening of a negotiation. The recruiters relented, or perhaps simply ran out of patience. She was assigned to the 25th Rifle Division. But wanting to fight and being equipped to fight were, in the summer of 1941, entirely different propositions. The Red Army could not arm everyone. Equipment was scarce, weapons were scarcer, and a newly arrived female volunteer was at the bottom of every priority list. Pavlichenko was handed not a rifle but an RGD-33 stick grenade, a crude fragmentation device useful for close-quarters defense and utterly worthless for the kind of precision work she had trained for. Her assignment was to dig trenches, a soldier with no soldier's weapon, scraping dirt while the front collapsed around her. She had not fired a single shot in combat. She was digging ditches with a grenade clipped to her belt. And within weeks, she would have a higher kill count than most veteran soldiers would achieve in the entire war. But first, the weapon, the rifle that would become inseparable from her name. The Mosin-Nagant Model 1891 was a bolt-action rifle that had been in service since the days of the Tsars, a weapon older than the revolution itself. Chambered in 7.62 by 54mm rimmed, it was heavy, mechanically simple, and brutally reliable. Other rifles jammed in mud or seized in sub-zero cold. The Mosin-Nagant kept working. It was the kind of weapon that rewarded patience over finesse, that could absorb the sustained abuse of trench warfare and frontline conditions that would render more sophisticated designs useless. Its effective range exceeded 400 meters with iron sights. With a telescopic sight mounted, a skilled shooter could reach considerably farther. It was not elegant. It was not modern. It had none of the engineering refinement of the weapons being produced in German factories. But in the hands of someone with steady nerves and mechanical precision, it was a killing instrument of extraordinary efficiency. The bolt action meant a slower rate of fire than a semi-automatic, which meant every shot had to count. For a sniper, that was not a limitation. It was a philosophy. This was the rifle Pavlichenko would carry through two of the most savage sieges on the Eastern Front. The rifle that would earn her a name that made German soldiers afraid to raise their heads above cover, and the stage where that name would be earned was already set. Odessa sits on the northwestern shore of the Black Sea, a major port city vital to Soviet supply lines and morale. By August 1941, Romanian and German forces had encircled it from the land side, pressing the defenders into a shrinking perimeter. The terrain around the city was a sniper's landscape, flat steppe broken by low ridges, giving way to urban rubble as the siege chewed through residential neighborhoods and industrial districts. Long sight lines stretched across open ground. Shattered buildings offered elevated positions with multiple escape routes. It was the kind of terrain where one well-placed shooter could control an entire sector, could make an advancing company stop dead in its tracks because nobody wanted to be the next one to step into the open. The defenders knew they were buying time. Every day held a small act of defiance against an enemy that expected the city to fall in weeks. Every enemy soldier killed was one fewer pressing the perimeter. And someone was about to start killing them at a rate that defied explanation. The woman with no rifle was about to be handed one. And within 75 days, 187 men would wish she had not been. August 1941. The front line outside Odessa, and Lyudmila Pavlichenko is about to fire her first shot in anger. It is August 8, 1941, near the town of Belyaivka, on the crumbling perimeter of the Odessa defenses. The air is heavy with the dry heat of a Ukrainian summer. Dust hangs motionless in windless air, fine and pale, coating every surface and every throat. Pavlichenko is in a forward position, possibly assigned to observation, possibly part of yet another trench detail. She does not yet have her own rifle, but a comrade's Mosin-Nagant is available, leaned against a dirt wall or resting on a sandbag, its wooden stock warm from the sun. Two figures are visible at approximately 400 meters, German officers, moving in the open, perhaps consulting a map, perhaps surveying the Soviet positions through binoculars. They do not know they are being watched. 400 meters is a significant distance for iron sights, at the outer edge of reliable accuracy for the platform. It requires an understanding of bullet drop, a feel for the trigger's breakpoint, and the ability to control your breathing so completely that the crosshairs settle into stillness. The rifle is unfamiliar in her hands, but mechanically identical to what she has trained on. The weight is the same, the action is the same, the math is the same. She takes aim, the first officer drops. The sound of the shot rolls across the flat ground, and in the time it takes to echo, her hands are already moving. The bolt cycles, that distinctive clack and slide of the Mosin-Nagant action, a sound that would become the metronome of her war. A fresh round seats in the chamber. She fires again. The second officer falls. 2 shots, 2 kills, 400 meters, with a borrowed rifle. The men around her stare. The woman who was digging trenches yesterday has just done what half of them have not managed in weeks of fighting. In the time it takes to draw 2 breaths, Lyudmila Pavlichenko stops being a volunteer with a grenade and becomes a sniper. She will never go back. Those were kills number 1 and 2. 307 more were coming. After Belyaivka, everything changes. Pavlichenko is formally assigned as a sniper, and now her Mosin-Nagant is her own. The early days of the Odessa siege are a crucible that burns away everything theoretical about her training and replaces it with the hard knowledge that comes only from doing. She learns the rhythms of the front line the way a musician learns tempo, when to move and when to remain so perfectly still that the human eye slides over her position without registering it. She learns to read wind by watching how dust moves over rubble, to judge distance by the way heat shimmer distorts a silhouette, to identify enemy positions by the faintest tell, a glint lasting a fraction of a second. a shadow that does not match the angle of the sun. On the other side of the line, something is shifting. German and Romanian soldiers along the Odessa perimeter begin to notice a pattern they cannot explain. Certain sectors become death zones. Officers who expose themselves for even a moment go down. Patrols crossing open ground lose men to single, precise shots fired from positions that artillery cannot locate. The kills are not random. They are targeted with a surgical intelligence that speaks of training and discipline. Officers, non-commissioned officers, machine gunners, anyone whose death disrupts the chain of command or suppresses supporting fire. Someone on the Soviet side is hunting with a method that goes beyond marksmanship. It is a system of deliberate dismantlement, one bullet at a time. This is the part they never tell you about snipers. It is not the shooting that breaks you. It is the watching. It is the waiting. It is the discipline to lie motionless under a camouflage screen while insects crawl across your face and artillery shakes the ground beneath your body. It is the psychological weight of watching a human being through a scope, seeing his face in detail, reading his expression, and choosing the exact moment to end his life. It is the knowledge that if you do not pull the trigger, the person next to you dies instead. The calculus is simple. The cost of performing it day after day is not. By late August, Pavlichenko's kill count is climbing at a rate that strains belief. She is not merely effective, she is conspicuously, methodically devastating. Her routine is disciplined to the point of ritual. She selects positions before dawn, remains motionless through the long burning hours of the day, takes only shots she is certain will connect, and relocates before the enemy can triangulate her position. The word spreads, and it spreads in both directions. Among the Soviet defenders, morale lifts every time the count is updated. In a siege where every day feels like a slow-motion defeat, one woman is inflicting disproportionate damage that makes the enemy cautious and gives the defenders room to breathe. On the German and Romanian side, the effect is corrosive. The psychological impact of a sniper is always outsized relative to the actual casualties, because one invisible shooter can paralyze an entire company's willingness to move. But Pavlichenko's consistency elevates that fear into something approaching superstition. Soldiers begin to dread certain angles, certain approaches. Officers demand counter-sniper operations, requesting specialists to solve a problem that artillery and mortar fire have failed to solve. But here is what the German command did not know yet. The sniper terrorizing their lines was not just good. She was about to become the most lethal female combatant in recorded military history, and their first attempts to stop her were about to make everything worse. Odessa is holding, barely, but the siege is entering its most brutal phase, and Lyudmila Pavlichenko is about to be tested in ways that go far beyond marksmanship. What happens next, over 75 days and then 8 months of hell, would turn a soldier into a legend, and a legend into something the Nazis could not stop, could not buy, and could not kill. The rhythm of killing at Odessa settles into something almost industrial in its efficiency. Each day before dawn, Pavlichenko moves to a pre-selected position, a pile of rubble that was once someone's home, a rooftop with 2 exits and a clear sight line across 300 meters of open ground, a shallow scrape in the earth covered with debris and dust, invisible from 10 paces. She waits. Hours pass. The scope gathers a fine film of Ukrainian dust, and she clears it with slow, deliberate movements that do not disturb her outline. Her breathing slows until it barely shifts the crosshairs. When a target presents itself, an officer raising binoculars, a machine gunner repositioning behind a wall, a courier sprinting across a gap between buildings, she fires. Once, sometimes twice. Then silence, and then she is gone, relocating before the retaliatory fire can find her. The kill count rises methodically. 50, 80, 100. 100 kills in less than 2 months. More than one confirmed enemy soldier dead every single day, from a single rifle in a single pair of hands. By mid-siege, Pavlichenko is promoted to senior sergeant. The promotion comes not with fanfare, but with a new burden. She is now expected to train other snipers, to pass on the knowledge that is keeping her alive and making the enemy afraid. During the siege, in the compressed intimacy of wartime, Pavlichenko marries a fellow sniper named Alexei Kitsenko. The details are sparse, as wartime marriages in the Red Army often were, brief and practical, born of the desperate human need for connection amid constant death. Two people who understood the same weight, who carried the same scope-glass nightmares, who could look at each other and not have to explain what it cost. Kitsenko is killed shortly after by mortar fire. There is a particular cruelty in the randomness of it. Pavlichenko chose every one of her targets with surgical deliberation. She could control her rifle. She could not control the war. And the war had just taken the one person who understood what it cost her to keep pulling the trigger. The mortar that killed her husband did not care who it hit. October 1941. The order comes down through the chain of command, and the defenders of Odessa know what it means before the words are spoken. The city cannot be held. The garrison will withdraw by sea. On October 15th, Pavlichenko's unit evacuates to Sevastopol, the Soviet Union's great naval fortress on the Crimean Peninsula. Already carrying 187 names on her ledger, she is a senior sergeant, tested by 2.5 months of unbroken combat. But the withdrawal from Odessa is not a retreat to safety. It is a transfer from one killing ground to another. Sevastopol is already surrounded, and the Germans have learned her name. Sevastopol is a different beast entirely. Where Odessa was a port city on flat steppe, Sevastopol is a fortress carved into limestone cliffs, riddled with underground tunnels, bunkers, and ammunition stores blasted into the rock over centuries of military use. The terrain around it is rougher, steeper, more broken, a landscape of ravines choked with scrub and ridgelines that offer commanding views in every direction. The German and Romanian forces pressing this siege are better organized, better supplied, and operating under direct orders to take the city at any cost. The Luftwaffe controls the skies. Artillery bombardment is relentless, the mineral smell of pulverized limestone hanging permanently in the air, like the scent of an open grave. Supply reaches the defenders only by sea, and even that lifeline is under constant submarine and air attack. For a sniper, this terrain is a paradox. The elevation changes, and broken ground offer superb concealment and devastatingly long sightlines. But the same features shelter enemy snipers, and the German command, now fully aware that Pavlichenko is among the defenders, begins deploying dedicated counter-sniper teams to hunt her. As her tally climbs past 200, then past 250, the German command takes a step so extraordinary it speaks more clearly than any tactical report could about the psychological devastation she is inflicting. Loudspeakers are positioned facing the Soviet lines, and tinny, distorted voices echo across no man's land. The broadcasts are addressed to her, specifically, personally, by reputation. The offer is absurd in its attempt at enticement. Plenty of chocolate, and a German officer's commission if she defects. Chocolate. As if the woman who had drawn first blood at Belyaevka and fought through 2 sieges could be bought with confectionery and a uniform change. She does not respond. The kills continue. The broadcasts change tone. The enticement curdles into something uglier. Personal threats, specific and vicious. Among their own troops, the Germans begin referring to her by a name that carries the particular flavor of fear disguised as contempt. The Soviets have their own name, Lady Death. Think about what it takes to make an entire army try to bribe a single soldier with chocolate and a promotion. Think about what it means when that fails and they switch to death threats. That is not strategy. That is fear. The Nazis had conquered most of Europe. They had crushed armies numbering in the millions, and they were broadcasting personal pleas to a 25-year-old woman with a bolt-action rifle, begging her to stop. By May 1942, the count reaches 257. The woman who had been handed a grenade and told to dig trenches now holds a lieutenant's commission. Her methods remain unchanged: patience, precision, relocation. But the physical toll is mounting. Multiple wounds, the constant hypervigilance that never allows the nervous system to fully rest. The grinding isolation of a discipline that requires you to be completely alone with your scope and your thoughts for hours and days at a stretch. She was the deadliest sniper on the Eastern Front, and the very skills that made her lethal were slowly destroying her from the inside. But the loudspeaker broadcasts were only one tool the Germans deployed. They also sent their best snipers. Of the tally she would ultimately compile, 36 were enemy snipers, specialists dispatched to find and eliminate the shooter who was dismantling their frontline morale one officer at a time. Counter-sniper warfare is the most intimate and terrifying form of infantry combat. Two trained killers occupy the same shattered landscape, each knowing the other is out there, each knowing that the first to make a mistake dies. There is no charging, no artillery support, no reinforcement. Just two people with rifles, hunting each other through a maze of rubble and shadow. Counter-sniper work demands a level of battlefield awareness that goes beyond marksmanship into something almost preternatural. It means identifying where you would set up if you were the enemy, and then watching those positions for hours without blinking, searching for the barely perceptible signs of human presence. A shadow that falls at the wrong angle, a disturbance in vegetation that does not match the wind, a glint lasting less than a heartbeat. The most famous of these engagements stretches over 3 days. The details come from Pavlichenko's own account. A German sniper, possibly a dedicated marksman dispatched specifically to kill her, occupies a position within killing range. For 3 days, neither fires. Neither makes an unnecessary movement. Imagine the compression of that experience. The world narrows to the width of a scope. Every sound is analyzed. Every shift in light is catalogued. The battlefield continues around them. Artillery falls, infantry skirmishes flare and die, men shout and bleed and crawl. But for these two, the war has collapsed into a private duel measured in fractions of inches, and the rhythm of controlled breathing. The heat of the day, the cold of the night, the maddening discipline of not moving when every instinct screams at you to shift your weight, to scratch, to look away for just a second. On the third morning, the German sniper makes what Pavlichenko later described with devastating simplicity as one move too many. Perhaps he shifts to relieve the agony of prolonged stillness. Perhaps he adjusts his scope. Perhaps he raises his head a single centimeter above his cover, an almost imperceptible motion that in any other context would mean nothing. But in this context, between these two, it means everything. Pavlichenko fires. The duel is over. 3 days, 2 snipers, 1 mistake, 1 move too many, and Lady Death added another name to a list that was becoming the longest in the war. She won every counter-sniper engagement she fought. Every one. 36 trained marksmen sent to kill her. 36 body bags. But the enemy that finally pulled her from the front line was not a German bullet. It was a piece of shrapnel she never saw coming. June 1942. The siege of Sevastopol enters its final, most desperate phase. The German assault is overwhelming the defenders through sheer weight of firepower and numbers. The fortress city that had held for months is cracking. In the chaos of close combat and relentless bombardment, a mortar round detonates near Pavlichenko's position. The concussive wave hits first, that invisible hammer blow of compressed air that scrambles thought and perception, and then the shrapnel follows, tearing into her face. It is her 4th wound of the war. She has survived previous injuries and the shell shock that accompanies them, the accumulated neurological damage of being too close to too many explosions for too many months. But this wound is different. Not because it is necessarily the most physically severe, because of what the Soviet command decides to do about it. The order comes from high above her pay grade. Pavlichenko is to be evacuated. Not to a field hospital behind the lines. Out, off the Crimean Peninsula entirely. She is extracted by submarine, one of the most dramatic and resource-intensive extraction methods available. A vessel and crew risked for a single passenger, designated a valuable asset too important to lose. She protests. She wants to return to the line. The rifle is what she does. It is what she is. But the decision is final. The Soviet Union has arrived at a calculation that transcends tactics. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, alive and visible, is worth more than Lyudmila Pavlichenko behind a scope. Her tally is complete. The propaganda weapon is more dangerous than the ballistic one. The rifle that had terrorized Nazi troops for 10 months fell silent. Not because the Nazis stopped it. They never could. It fell silent because the Soviets realized that Lady Death was more dangerous as a symbol than as a shooter. The deadliest female sniper in history was pulled from the war. But the war was not done with her, not even close. The full weight of the record deserves to be stated plainly, without embellishment, because the numbers do not need help. 309. Not estimates, not projections. Confirmed, verified, documented kills. Each one required verification by a spotter or commanding officer. Each one represents a moment when a human life ended because one woman chose to pull a trigger with absolute precision. The toll from Odessa, compiled in 2.5 months of siege, the remainder at Sevastopol, across 8 months of escalating horror. The woman who had won every duel, all 36 of them, already scarred from 4 wounds, including the shrapnel that ended her combat career and shell shock that had reshaped the architecture of her nervous system. She was 26 years old when they pulled her off the line. To put the number in context, that tally makes her the deadliest female sniper in recorded history and places her among the highest-scoring snipers of any gender in the entirety of the Second World War. The real number, as with all snipers whose confirmed counts represent only what observers could verify, was almost certainly higher. Recovering in Moscow, Pavlichenko is assigned a new role, training the next generation of Red Army snipers. She pours into the program everything the sieges had taught her. Not just marksmanship technique and ballistic calculation, but the counter-sniper awareness, the discipline of stillness, the psychological armor required to endure the isolation and moral weight of the work. Her trainees would go on to kill over 100 Axis soldiers, a grim multiplication of her own lethality. She had become a factory of precision, but she fought the assignment with the same stubbornness that had carried her past the recruitment desk and into the trenches. She wanted the front. The Soviet command refused. The woman who had survived every duel, every bombardment, every wound was now too valuable to risk. She was promoted to major and told that her war would be fought with words, not bullets. In late 1942, at Stalin's direct orders, Pavlichenko becomes a propagandist. She is sent to the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom to advocate for the opening of a second front in Europe, a strategic demand the Soviets would press until the Normandy landings in June 1944 finally delivered it. She arrives in America wounded 4 times over, speaking no English, carrying a weight that no translator could convey. She had already buried a husband in the rubble of Odessa. She had spent 10 months making decisions that most people cannot fathom. And now she is standing before crowds of thousands in a country that has been at war for less than a year, trying to explain the Eastern Front to people who have never heard a shell explode. American journalists are fascinated and visibly unsettled. Here is a young woman who has personally killed more enemy soldiers than most American units had engaged. She does not look like the propaganda posters. She looks like a university student, which of course she was. Her speeches are blunt, direct, and threaded with a frustration that cuts through every layer of diplomatic politesse. She tells American audiences about the scale of the dying, the desperation of the defense, the urgent need for Allied action in the West to relieve the pressure on Soviet forces who are bearing the overwhelming majority of the war's human cost. The most significant relationship to emerge from the tour is with Eleanor Roosevelt, the First Lady of the United States. The two women form a genuine bond that transcends propaganda and politics. Roosevelt, a lifelong champion of human rights and women's capability, recognizes in Pavlichenko something beyond the headline statistics, a woman who has been asked to carry an impossible burden and has carried it, at a cost that is only beginning to reveal itself. Their friendship endures through letters across the Iron Curtain and culminates in a reunion in 1957, a meeting between two women whose lives could hardly have been more different, but whose mutual respect was unshakable. Half a world away from the rifle that made her famous, Lyudmila Pavlichenko stood in front of American crowds and did something harder than sniping. She asked for help, and she refused to be polite about it. The woman the Nazis had tried to bribe with chocolate was now shaking hands with the First Lady of the United States. History has a sense of irony that no screenwriter could match. It was during this period that the most chilling German response to her record became widely known. The threat that had been broadcast over loudspeakers at Sevastopol, "If we catch you, we will tear you into 309 pieces." Pavlichenko's response, recounted later with characteristic dryness, carried the kind of dark humor that only someone who has lived inside violence can produce. She took it as confirmation that her count was accurate. They had confirmed her count. The honors followed. Pavlichenko received the Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest military decoration the nation could bestow, along with 2 orders of Lenin. For a woman who had been handed a grenade and told to dig trenches barely a year earlier, the arc of transformation was staggering, but medals a cold comfort for what the war had taken from her. The battle was over. The aftermath was just beginning. After the war ended, Pavlichenko completed her history degree at Kiev University, the same degree she had been pursuing when the world caught fire. The history student who became history returned to the study of it, taking a position as a naval researcher, a quiet academic career that stood in almost surreal contrast to the violence of her wartime years. She had wanted to be a historian. She became one. But the history she studied could never be separated from the history she had made, and the past she examined in archives and libraries would always be shadowed by the past she had lived through with a rifle in her hands. The wounds did not heal cleanly. Pavlichenko suffered from lifelong post-traumatic stress disorder, depression and alcohol dependency, consequences that the Soviet system was poorly equipped to acknowledge, let alone treat. Psychological wounds were not part of the heroic narrative the state wished to maintain. The physical scars from 4 combat wounds were visible, permanent reminders that mapped the geography of violence across her body. The psychological scars were worse, deeper, invisible, and untreatable by the medicine of the time. The rifle fell silent in 1942. The war inside Lyudmila Pavlichenko never stopped. The machinery of that discipline, the hyper-awareness, the emotional suppression, the ability to watch a human face through a scope and choose the moment of death, does not simply switch off when the orders change. It runs and runs, grinding against the ordinary textures of civilian life, turning peace into something that feels wrong, that feels like a held breath that never releases. The Soviet Union was quick to mythologize her. Commemorative stamps were issued in 1943, while the war still raged, and again in 1976. Her story was absorbed into the national mythology of the Great Patriotic War, the woman who proved that Soviet citizens, regardless of gender, would fight with a ferocity the fascist invaders could not match or break. But mythology simplifies. It always does. It remembers the tally and the nickname. It remembers the bravery and the decorations. It often forgets the dead husband, the shrapnel, the nightmares, the drinking. The real Lyudmila Pavlichenko was not a symbol. She was a person who did extraordinary things and paid an extraordinary price for every single one of them. Lyudmila Pavlichenko died of a stroke on October 10, 1974. She was 58 years old. In a different life, the life she had planned before the war swallowed everything. She might have been a professor by then, grey-haired and sharp-tongued, lecturing students about the patterns of the past. Instead, The past had used her up in ways that no degree or decoration could undo. She was buried in Moscow's prestigious Novodevichy Cemetery, the same grounds that hold Chekhov, Eisenstein, and Khrushchev. Her son Rostislav was later laid to rest beside her. Return for a moment to the image that opened this story. A 25-year-old history student lying in the rubble outside a besieged city, peering through a borrowed scope on a hot August morning. She pulled the trigger at 400 meters and began a journey that would see her survive every sniper duel, be wounded 4 times, be extracted by submarine, befriend a first lady, and be threatened by name by the army she terrorized. Of the 2,000 women who picked up sniper rifles, fewer than 1 in 4 came home. She was one of them. She carried the name they gave her for the rest of her life, through the stamps and the speeches and the silence that followed. They called her Lady Death, but what the name never captured was the cost of carrying it. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more like it coming.